My name is Lutfi Siddiqui. I now live in London, home of the London 2012 Olympics. Although at that time I used to live in Singapore, and I remember the bidding process for London that happened in Singapore in 2005. When I lived in London before, that was 2004, the East End of London, where I used to live, wasn't much to look at. And now that I've returned in 2015, it's completely different. It's unrecognizable. The regeneration process that has occurred at the time of the Olympics seems to be dramatic and enduring. It also seems to have had an impact on the psyche of the country. If you look at the medal haul at Rio this year, the team Great Britain was number 2 in the list of gold medals, and that may or may not be related to the confidence generated from the London 2012 Olympics. So our objective today here is to talk about the legacy of major sporting events, and particularly what's the ideal legacy that we would like to remain after Tokyo 2020. We have the benefit of there still being a bit of time left, so that if we imagine that we're now in 2024 or 2025, then looking back at 2012, what would we have liked to do differently so that we had the ideal legacy? And so that's my message to particularly our Japanese friends over here, is that if you could also help us think this through, what would you like to be the ideal legacy? Both in terms of physical, hard, material, tangible legacy, but also in terms of the immaterial, the softer issues, the cultural, socio-economic, spiritual sides of that legacy. In terms of the legacy domestically here in the country, but also your interaction with the rest of the world and the perception that Japan might have. And as we think about that, if we could also think about what needs to be done by whom? What can we do as individuals? What do we need the government to do? What does business need to do? Academia? Social entrepreneurs? It would be great to have a think about what actions need to be taken to take us to that ideal legacy. To get us going, we have some tremendous sources of inspiration right here in this panel. It's diverse, it's from all over the world, from a variety of domains and specialty areas. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's meant to be interactive, so please feel free to interrupt if necessary, but I will have space for Q&A afterwards. So allow me to introduce my distinguished panel, and I will do this in a fairly random order. So I'll start with Dionysia. By the way, the names over here, it's any one person who's able to pronounce all of the names correctly deserves an Olympic gold medal. But I will try. Dionysia Theodora Evierinopoulos. Did I get that right? Dionysia is a lawyer by training. She's a former member of Parliament when she was chair of the Environment Committee, and she's now chair of the Circle of Mediterranean Parliamentarians on Sustainable Development. Dionysia is also an Olympian in the sense that she was born in Olympia. And speaking of legacy, she has, and Greece and Olympia has, the longest legacy you can think of the Olympics. So hopefully we will benefit from the duration of that. Minister Cho Yoon-sun, she is Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism for the Republic of Korea. Also a lawyer by training. I'm surrounded by lawyers. She has served as the General Counsel for Citibank Korea and has been a Member of Parliament since 2008. There is the legacy of the 1988 Seoul Olympics, which is probably the first time that I, as a teenager at the time, have really grasped and been involved with Olympics. So it's significant for me. But you're also hosting the Winter Olympics in 2018. So that's the perspective. Then we have Mr. Naheed Nenshi. Naheed, I believe, is not a lawyer. Are you?
No.
No. He's not a lawyer, but he is a rock star mayor. He's the mayor of Calgary, and he was voted the world. He was the winner of the World Mayor Prize in 2014. He's a Kennedy Fellow at Harvard and a former McKinsey consultant. I think apart from the 1988 Winter Olympics, so while you were looking after Seoul, they were hosting the Winter Olympics in 1988. You're also, I believe, bidding for the 2026 Winter Olympics. I hope that wasn't a secret that I've just let out.
We're exploring a bid.
I see.
2026 Winter Olympics, but yes.
So next up is Mr. Peter Jennings. Peter is a lawyer by training. And he is
Feeling a little uncomfortable up here.
the president of Dow Chemical for Japan and Korea. I read somewhere that Dow Chemical has been here for 60 years, the first foreign company listed in the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Is that right?
Everything you've said is true so far. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. And as global partners to the Olympic movement, and now the official chemistry partner, there is a global perspective, not just the Japan one. And then last but not least, we have Ms. Hiromi Kawamura. I actually don't know if she's a lawyer or not.
No,
okay.
unfortunately.
But Ms. Hiromi Kawamura is Senior Director for International Relations of Tokyo 2020 and a secondee to the IOC for Tokyo 2020. So she lives in Lausanne in Switzerland right now. So ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the panel. So let's start with some opening statements. And Naheed, if I may start with you, please. Legacy, is it ever positive?
Yes, it can be. And, you know, I'm speaking, as Lutfi pointed out, I'm speaking both as someone with some perspective of the history of hosting an Olympic Games nearly 30 years ago, but also as someone at the very beginning of a journey of thinking about doing another one. And so we think about this in both ways. And Calgary 88 had a number of interesting legacy pieces, and I think it'd be helpful for our discussion today to break down what we mean by that complicated word legacy. And I would argue that we need to think about legacy in at least 4 ways: financial legacy, sport legacy, infrastructure legacy, and social legacy. And I happen to believe that Calgary 88 was a great success on all 4 of those. And I can talk for some time, but I won't, about a bunch of the innovations that we brought in Calgary 88. One of the first Olympics to turn an operating profit for the community, which is plowed back into sporting legacy, and infrastructure legacy. One of the first Olympics to use volunteers extensively, only because that's our culture and that's the only way we knew how to do it. One of the most interesting conversations I've had in the last few years was in London 2012, when I had the opportunity to talk to the then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. And I remarked on how wonderful the volunteers at the 2012 Olympics were. They called them game makers, not volunteers. And Mayor Johnson said to me, well, we actually hired far more than we needed, and we made it a priority to hire people who had never volunteered before. And I thought that was very interesting. And I asked him why, and he said, London is a place of transition. People come and they leave. And we don't have a deep, deep commitment as we would like to building the community. So the sport for us, and he was being typical bombastic Boris, but he said the sport for us is secondary to the community building aspect of the games. And that's something that I think Calgary did very, very well. So I don't want to bore everyone with a ton of details. I can get to them later, but we constructed a new light rail transit system for the games. We built our main public square, which is right outside of my window at City Hall, which is called, surprisingly enough, Olympic Plaza. The University of Calgary got new residence buildings, which were used for the Athletes Village, and we built a new jail. You may be wondering about that last one. It wasn't used as a jail, it was used as the media center. And those of us in politics may think that's actually pretty appropriate. We actually started an organization called the Calgary Olympic Development Association, or CODA, now called Winsport Canada, in 1956. And it was set up in 1956 when Calgary was a city of not even 400,000 people, with the express purpose of bidding on future Winter Olympic Games. And they finally made the winning bid in 1981 and continue to operate many of the facilities now. The 88 Games generated $1.4 billion for Canada's economy. That's in the 1980s. The financial legacy was $260 million surplus on the operating side, of which $90 million was donated to CODA, $70.5 million to create an endowment fund for the management of the legacy facilities. That's now $185 million. And one of the things that we're very excited about is we've maintained the facilities really well. So I happen to be a huge fan of speed skating. That's my favorite sport. And Calgary's Olympic Oval continues to be among the fastest ice in the world. We set world records every season on that ice because we've taken really good care of it. The sporting legacy has also been extremely important. Calgary remains the centre for winter sport in Canada. We had a distinction in the first two Olympics that we hosted, in 1976 in Montreal and 1988 in Calgary, of being the host country with the worst athletic performance at the games they hosted. Neither of those games resulted in one gold medal for the host country. In fact, in 1988, Canada won 5 medals total, including 0 golds. And in 2014 in Sochi, Canada was the 3rd ranked country overall with 25 medals, including 10 golds. And that is a direct result of the investment we've made in winter sports infrastructure and training, from playground to podium, in winter sport, which has made a big deal. And as you heard, just a few months ago, my city council approved exploring a bid for 2026. And maybe we'll get into more detail on that, but it is a very Agenda 2020 compliant bid. As I've said many times, it will be a truly Canadian bid. In other words, it will be transparent, open, honest, engaged with community, and super cheap. And we hope that that will be something that will be appealing to the IOC. But what's very interesting about that, and my last thought before I stop here, is on the question of social infrastructure. The reason we're not officially bidding and we're only exploring a bid is because we will be spending the next 8 or 9 months in deep conversation with our community and with experts about whether this is the right thing to do for the city. And that question will be entirely centered around this question of legacy.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And of course, from a Canada point of view, you also have the Vancouver Games in 2010.
Yes, and we're very, very proud of our neighbors across the mountains in Vancouver, who we think really took the 1988 model of operating Calgary and brought it into a new century and did a marvelous job.
Excellent. Minister Cho, if I may come to you now. You're a fellow 1988 Olympic host. The Korean perspective, please.
Actually, as Rufti just mentioned, Korea has hosted a Summer Olympic Games in year 1988. And we are now hosting the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games in year 2018, which is 30 years kind of later. And actually, I'd like to share with you how great legacy we earned from the 1988 Olympic Games. In terms of the infrastructure and the direct legacy out of those Olympic Games, we founded a sports promotion foundation to promote all those sports in terms of schools and in terms of the everyday life, in terms of the elite sports system. And at the same time, we have the 1.2 million square meter Olympic Park. Consists of the various arenas and galleries and museums and hotels. And then some of the arenas are now being converted to some concert halls, hosting the K-pop studios like the Dokyo Dome. And in addition to those physical legacy, I'd like to proudly introduce some intangible legacy out of the Seoul Olympic Games. Seoul Olympic Game was hosted right after about the end of Cold War, and then that has a record of participating. The largest number of countries involved participated, which is 159, and the largest number of players involved, 13.3 thousand players. Actually, in 1980 Moscow Olympic, 60 countries from the democratic region did not participate in the 1980 Moscow Olympic. And in 1984 LA Olympic, 18 countries from the communist region did not participate in the 1984. But right after the Cold War, 1988 in Seoul Olympics, the largest number of countries could participate in 16 years. And actually, from then on, that was a great momentum for Korea because we could expand our territory of kind of a national relationship with the the East European countries, which is the communist countries at the time. Then there was a great intangible legacy that we have. And I think internally, the people, which is most important, is whether the Korean people, the people who hosted the mega sporting event, consider the event as a success or not. But from the many polls, we found that the Korean citizens conceive the Seoul Olympic Games as one of the top second most proud achievement that the Korean people have ever made, following by the Semaul movement, which is a movement to go over the poverty and everything. Wow. So, as a country having such a experience of having a positive legacy, and we are now when we are preparing for the year 2018 Pyeongchang Olympic and Paralympic Games, we are thinking about what kind of legacy, tangible, intangible, we can make. But as a kind of paradoxical situation is, at that time, by the Seoul Olympic Games in the year 1988, the largest number from communist and the democratic country participated. However, still, the Korean Peninsula is the last remaining country divided, north and south. And from year 2018, from Pyeongchang, year 2020 Tokyo, year 2022 Beijing, the 3 consecutive Olympic Games are hosted by the Far East Asian countries, which will never happen in the Olympic history ever going forward, I guess. But I think kind of considering, kind of facing a very imminent kind of threat from the nuclear weapons from the North Korea in hosting the Olympic game in Korean Peninsula, and followed by 2 consecutive Olympic Games, I think Pyeongchang Olympic Game will be a start of showing how the Olympic spirit pursuing peace can be shown through sport and can be executed.
Wow. So the international dimension, the diplomacy dimension of legacy is very important. I would like you to just share with the audience something you mentioned to me earlier about the soccer field in front of the, just because I'm from Bangladesh and I don't consider skiing to be a sport, but there is a sport that there's a soccer field you mentioned.
Oh, yes, right. We are struggling about how to make good use of the facilities afterwards. And we invite a lot of creative ideas from the people. And one of that is in front of the ski slide, a jump slide. In the front yard, we used it as a soccer field. So we hosted a professional soccer team and to have a play on the ground. And it is really, really fun and great. Then I think that is another way of using those front yard of the ski sliding sliding jump into kind of one of the interesting legacy.
Absolutely, I think. Which can be used even when there's no snow. It reminded me also of the Dolomites in Italy, Cortina. I was there on holiday some time ago, and they have the 1956 Olympics, Winter Olympics slope over there now as a haunted structure that's not used. So this is very creative. Peter, sir, if we could come to you.
Yes, thank you. And I'm pleased to be here today. I get in trouble all the time because being a lawyer, my public affairs people, they always say stick to the script in Japan, just stick to the script, and I rarely do that. So Dow is a very proud sponsor of Tokyo 2020. We started in London and we are also in Korea. And we are the only B2B company that is a worldwide sponsor. And what our goal for Tokyo 2020, as well as the Korean Olympics, is to really bring Dow's innovation engine and our sustainability expertise to provide the most sustainable, to leave a legacy of sustainability. And we have been very successful in that in prior Olympics. And our goal here is to make Tokyo, I was at a very, very wonderful kickoff in Tokyo this week in Tokyo. And the president of the IOC and the vice president of the IOC and the new governor of Tokyo talked about what is the legacy of this game. And each one of them emphasized that the legacy has to be sustainability. Sustainability through technology and through innovation and through chemistry is really what Dow is providing. And you know, Dow spends $2 billion a year on R&D, and that's US dollars a year. And we have many, many PhDs, and they'd probably be aghast that I'm going to try and explain some of the things that we do because it's very detailed. So I'll try to be very, very high level. Dow is focused in Tokyo, for example. Dow is focused working with TOCOG, working with the Tokyo government, working with other companies, working with NGOs and communities in areas of infrastructure, sustainable technology, and education. When you come to Tokyo and when you go to the Korean Olympics, you won't see, you know, the other top sponsors, Panasonic, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, GE, Atos, Visa. You'll see a lot of advertising at the Olympics and around the Olympics. Dow is, you won't see Dow advertising. We take the sponsorship and our worldwide partnership to do things such as providing clean water initiatives for not only in Tokyo but for other areas because we have great technology in clean water, providing farm solutions in agriculture, whether it's by increasing, you know, through biotech technologies, lightweight transportation, materials, recyclable plastics, reusable plastics. Also, we take a great pride in the fact that we also do a significant amount of work in the area of energy efficiency, with reducing the carbon footprint, lowering labor costs, lowering costs of the infrastructure, and providing sustainable long-term solutions, whether it's through reducing the footprint and we say reusable, recyclable materials. The other thing that we have done, and a great deal of Dow is focused on, after the Rio Olympics, Dow and Bridgestone, another one of our worldwide partners, signed a long-term commitment for education of underprivileged children in the area in Rio. And we will do the same thing in Tokyo by focusing on STEM education. STEM education is a big issue in Japan. STEM education for women even more important. We need more PhD chemists from Japan. So you'll see Dow actively involved in the communities focused on STEM education and focused on developing more PhD scientists. They don't have to come to work at Dow, but we'd be glad to take Japanese women to come. So let me just give you a couple examples of things that we have already done with respect to Tokyo 2020. And we're working with, for example, and some of this may be a little technical, we're working with a large Japanese company, one of our partners, Innowak, through our PU technology, which allows construction with less labor, and it's extremely critical as an infrastructure project. Working with Nippon Paint, we have developed a heat-resistant paint which enhances building durability, involves safety issues in the case of fire. We've worked with Taiyo Kogyo. How do you pronounce that, Sasaki-san? Okay. Taiyo Kogyo.
Taiyo Kogyo.
Thank you very much. New to market halogen-free wrap materials using Dow elastomer membrane, offering environmentally friendly solutions to build temporary structures. One of the things that Tokyo 2020 is working on is many of the structures are going to be temporary structures. So that they're built in Tokyo for basketball or volleyball, they can be taken, reassembled in a different part of Japan, which Dow is very much focused on doing that, providing materials that can help with that. We're working with Atomics on especially road marking paint, which could be applied to designate Olympic lanes, which can be easily applied and removed after the games. The ease of application contributes to solve limited labor issues during the construction period of the games.
Okay.
Last
sorry.
one,
Yeah.
my last comment, in closing argument, because I am a lawyer. If you don't remember anything I've said so far, just this is your last takeaway.
So maybe the
We're very, oh, wait,
Maybe that
sorry.
was it, yeah.
I should have rehearsed more. We're very proud of our association with TOCOG.
Thank you very much.
And we have these for Korea as well. I'll be glad to provide you from Korea. So again, Dow is very proud of its partnership with the Olympics because of what it stands for and to help them provide the most successful games in history, both in Korea and in Japan.
Thank you. So we'll now return from the commercial break.
Yes. And you can't go to the store and buy Dow materials, but you can. We can work on that.
While we're doing commercials, my friend David Hurd, sitting over there, was in charge of Gastromotiva in Brazil. He's looking for sponsors. I'd very much like to introduce you to him at some point. Let's go to Dionysia, the Olympian. Your perspective, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Tokyo and all the other cities that are hosting the Olympic Games and continue the legacy of the games that started back in 776 before Christ in ancient Olympia, Greece. It is in southwestern Peloponnese.
Was Dow a sponsor at that time as well?
Actually, no, but maybe Greece is connected to Dow in a way because Mr. Liberius from
Yeah,
Dow,
I'm just gonna
he's
say.
Greek.
Our chairman and CEO is a very
Exactly.
proud Greek Australian, and he brings that up
So
every
there
day.
is
Yeah.
always a connection. Well, in Greece, everybody that is born around ancient Olympia, I think that brings within him or her the legacy of the Olympic Games in a way. It has really affected all of us in ways that we still wish that we contribute to the international community the most. And this is why every 4 years, the ceremony of the lighting of the Olympic Games happens in Olympia, and then the flame travels all over the world. It goes through all the continents and reaches the hosting state, the hosting city, in order to bring the first and foremost message of the Games, which is international peace and cooperation among the nations. This is what we would like you to always remember. It's a peaceful game. It is a game that has started in order to avoid unnecessary conflicts. The member states that back then decided to host the Games, they found the ancient Olympic Games as a way to measure their powers, to show off to each other like their best athletes, and then to stop fighting each other. And this is why every time that the Olympic Games were held in Greece, every 4 years, all the hostilities were to stop during the Olympic Games. So there are alternative ways to solve your differences. You don't have to fight. And on the other hand, that was a demand on behalf of the people, because the Olympic Games were not initiated by any king or any prince, an emperor. They were initiated by the people themselves. It is said that Hercules, one of our ancient mythological heroes, created the stadium and the Olympic Games. Hercules actually in our culture signifies the peoples themselves, that they wanted to solve their differences in these ways. In addition to that, if you just think of the ceremony of the Olympic Games, you directly get the messages. First of all, there were no other games but for a combination of spiritual and athletic games. So we had like 2 weeks of games. The first week, there were cultural competitions that were held. Theater, competitions of theater. Some of the very known theater pieces of the ancient drama or comedy that you all are aware of, they were first presented in the ancient stadium of Olympia. So it was about culture at the beginning. It was about competition of ideas, and it was about innovation. And at the second week, there was competition of sports. And the sports did not just occur like that, but there was a ceremony. Everybody that would like to participate to the Olympic Games should go through a ceremony of beautifying their bodies and calm their minds, so they would treat themselves in very nice ways in the spas. So there was a message of well-being, of protecting yourself and like reserving your own being. And this is a common message I think that both Greece and Japan has, because I know that Japan really pays very much attention to the health and the spirit and the body of the person. So it was about the health, the spirit, the fair competition, and of course it was about the nobility of the cause. Because no money was given to any of the laureates of the Olympic Games. Actually, even the word laureate, it comes from the only thing that the winners of the Games were getting, a laurel, a kotinos, as we were saying in Greek. And that was a small ring that was put around their hands, and it was created by the leaves of the olive trees that were located in the region of Olympia. The third aspect of this, apart from culture and sport, it was the preservation and the protection of the natural environment. Olive trees were not the only trees that exist and exist up to today to our region. Our region is one of the most rich in biodiversity regions of Europe. And the trees that existed back then exist up to today, exactly the same species, exactly in the same region of ancient Olympia and around the ancient city. Because the preservation of the natural environment, it was very important to ancient Greeks, even back then, that no pollution and no deforestation existed.
Wow.
Triangle, sports, culture, and environment.
So it's the spirit of Olympics that we need to go back to. Wellness, peace, and so on. Excellent.
Exactly.
Okay, last but not least, the view from the actual organizers of Tokyo 22, Ms. Kawamura. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. The honor to be here. The Olympic game is the powerful engagement event. And also at the same time, we have the really most complex, that we are so many stakeholders, the event. This means the mega event will deliver both the negative impact and also the positive legacy, at the same time. So we had a lot. They are tangible and they had legacy, such as the improvement of the public transportation in Rio de Janeiro during the Rio Olympic Games, and also the regeneration of the entire town of the East London, and also you mentioned, the minister that mentioned about the sustainable sports venue in South Korea and Calgary. So what then is meant by the soft legacy? Soft legacy means creating the positive social transformation thanks to the program that have the potential to create a better world, and which can therefore lead us to the being better human beings. The Olympic game has the potential to work as a catalyst or accelerator to create these positive social changes. I believe this is the meaning of the title of this session. The Tokyo 2020 is the first organizing committee to develop the named action and legacy plan with 8 areas: the sports and health, and economy, education, culture, sustainability, and urban planning, recovery, PL to the world, at the very beginning of the preparation of Olympic Games. So after this session, I'd like to propose the Tokyo 2020 to change the title of the plan to the action and the positive legacy plan.
I see. But you have a legacy plan built into the action plan already.
So under this plan, each stakeholder develops its own plan. This will make this make help the unexpected risk and develop their resilience skills to their stakeholders, because the risk and the knowledge will be shared among them. It also will reduce the barrier for the stakeholder, such as the TMG, to bring their new challenges. So I'm sure that Tokyo will have their most successful and positive legacy. So Tokyo has already launched the innovative project. That means that, for example, like the Olympic flag and the Paralympic flag tour at the same time for the first time in the Olympic Games, which previous organizing committee and the host cities tried to launch, but not to be delivered. So in order to positive legacy, as much as possible, I'd like to propose deliver the 3 key messages. One is the one platform.
What home?
One platform. Mm-hmm. That means share the information, to transfer the knowledge is under the one platform access, which is accessible to anyone and anywhere. The second one is the one brand. That means they manage the brands under the one umbrella. I mean, we can shout the mega event continuously heading to the huge mega event. The third one is the one key message. So under the one key message, to involve and engage people strategically.
Great. Thank you for that, Ms. Calvera. These are, to me, more focused on the actual event itself. How do we make it a great experience, which I understand. Is there an example of one way the society currently operates that might be changed over time as a legacy of the Olympics?
Yes, that means we can start. The people would like to do something, but people would like to do something to contribute to the Olympic Games or to be related to the Olympic Games. That means this platform, everyone can join in and jump into the the platform. So they propose their ideas, and somebody can the support and somebody to be integrated to to join the project.
I understand. So one platform, one brand, everyone who's creative, you have ideas, come on board, hop on board, and join this one inclusive platform.
Exactly, yes.
Is that the idea? Excellent. Nahid, I'd like to come to you, but just for a second, are there questions in the audience? Should we take a question first? Let's do that, sir. Please identify yourself, if you wouldn't mind.
My name is Mark Hoeker. I'm a professor of foreign management sport policy in the Netherlands.
Great.
And first, I'd like to thank the members of the forum for their enthusiasm. Sorry. I'd like to thank the forum members for their enthusiasm about the Olympic tradition and also their optimism about the Olympic and the social legacy of the Olympics. But at the same time, I also wonder whether we shouldn't be more critical about earlier experiences in order just to improve the Olympics in the future and have a better legacy. So how to learn from earlier failures, for example. I mentioned Montreal, which was a financial disaster. Also, the Olympics in Athens in 2004 created a lot of what is called white elephants, so stadiums that are not being used as much anymore as was intended. And I think also in Rio de Janeiro, the Olympics might have a financial impact, but if the same amount of money had been invested in education or health, it could have also probably even better legacy. So I think we should also be critical just to improve the legacy in the future, and I would like to ask
just before you go off, in your view as an academic studying this, which was the best Olympics that has had the best cost-effective legacy?
Well, it has never been compared that way, but I think
Off the top of your mind.
On top of my mind, I would say London.
London. Yeah, good. Did everyone hear that? It was London. Thank you. So that's the question that I was going to ask anyway, so please.
Thank you so much for raising that in an extraordinarily polite way. If I had been sitting on that side, I might have raised that question a little less politely. And fundamentally, that's why we in Calgary are going through this exploration phase. Because while we are enthusiastic, while we were excited about the legacy of 1988, we also fully recognize that the brand has become somewhat tarnished. And where Montreal may have been a one-off in terms of some of the challenges they had financially, it seems to be more the rule than the exception now. And particularly after Sochi, where no one knows how much money was spent, but we know that it was more than $30 billion. As Canadians, we're saying, is there a different way to do this? Is there a better way to do this? I had the great fortune of being in London and being in Rio de Janeiro, and you're exactly right. Rio built great stuff. The BRT system and the extension to the subway will serve people for a long time. The facilities will be recycled into elementary schools, but it does lead to the question, why didn't you just build the elementary schools in the first place? And so these are, and the answer, of course, is you don't have a whole bunch of TV revenue flowing in to help you build elementary schools on a day-to-day basis. And so these are exactly the questions that we need to address, and we need to determine, have the games gotten too big? Have they gotten too complicated? The example that I like to use is that our Olympic Oval continues, as I said earlier, to set world records every season. It also seats a very small number of people. But 99.109% of the people who watch the games watch it on television. So why are we building a 10,000 seat Olympic Oval that will be used only for one Olympic Games? And then, I go to the World Cup every year. I love it. It's my favorite sport. And there may be a few hundred people who come to watch it. And so, and I know in London, that beautiful Zaha Hadid Aquatic Center was built to be massively shrunken, because even in a city the size of London, even if it's the World Aquatic Championships, you'll get a tiny fraction of the audience that you would get for the Olympics. So I think that the question you're raising is an extremely important one. I think it's a question that cuts to the heart of the IOC and how they're thinking about Agenda 2020. And I think that the bids that we're seeing for the 2024 Summer Games, and certainly the bid that I'm hoping we may put forward for the 26 Games, will be not just Agenda 2020 compliant, but they will actually be looking at the Olympics in a brand new way. In Paris, they're only building one new facility, and it's a swimming facility because they say they haven't had a new swimming pool in 100 years. And in Los Angeles, the only thing they're proposing to build is a whitewater course for canoe kayak. Everything else is reusing existing facilities. And the message from the IOC, though not necessarily from the sporting federations yet, is very clear that if you're building new infrastructure, it counts against your bid, which is exactly the opposite of how things were in the past. So it remains to be seen how serious they are. But as I always say, the players make the game. And so if the cities that are bidding in a model that is low cost, that is able to maximize the financial legacy along with the other three, then I think the Olympic movement and the world sporting movement will follow.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, again, you started your question. I agree with what His Honor said in terms of the education. I do think, in my experience, Dow started this 10 years ago or 6 years ago and will continue, is I do think that everyone involved has learned and are taking the lessons from previous Olympics. And my view on this is, whether you're talking about complex issues that relate to society, whether it's clean water or whether it's affordable housing and all those things. The only way those problems get solved, and why I'm very optimistic about Tokyo 2020, is if you have collaboration between government, private industry, academia, local communities, and everyone works together. And so far, Tokyo, I think not only are they learning from the lessons in the past, there is a great sense of community here and collaboration here among the very critical people that need to deliver the game. So I think not only they're learning, but they're way ahead in terms of how are we going to present the games and reach our objectives.
Minister Cho, you wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, I think by hosting 30 years ago, 1988, when Korea was not adopted the regional autonomy. And then at the time, the Korean government is a central central system, and all those municipal governors are kind of appointed by the central government. So there was no domestic conflict in a political way. However, we adopted the regional autonomy, and the municipal governments are so eager to develop their own territory. And then when we were coordinating, we were kind of planning which city will do what. And it was extremely hard to assign a certain facility in one city which will be gone after the Olympic Games. So as soon as a city is designated as a hosting city, it is very hard to domestically reconcile in terms of efficiency. So I'd like to recommend to the IOC when later on, in order to achieve the more efficient way, more sustainable scheme, that I think it is one of the way is to encourage the applicants to form a consortium in advance before they apply, and then IOC can compare which consortium can serve as the most efficient and most cost-effective and most sustainable schemes, so that they can encourage the multiple countries or multiple cities can collaborate before they actually file the application. So I think that would be one of my idea to suggest to IOC.
That's a great idea. We have one question and another one, so we'll take two and then come back to the panel.
May I also comment on the Athens Games, maybe, because the question...
Yes, it was a specific point. Sorry, just a moment, please. Somebody did specifically mention Athens, so please comment on it.
Thank you very much. I think it is important. Well, Athens hosted the Olympic Games 3 times, in 1896, and then an intermediate Olympic Games in 1906, and the Olympic Games of 2004. In the first 2 times, we used installations that pre-existed. In the 3rd time, it was necessary to build new installations because of the huge participation of all, actually, the countries and the excessive number of the athletes that participated in the Olympic Games. And, of course, the modern way that Olympic Games take place. In our case, there was one default, the fact that we did not create a business plan that would take into account the maintenance of those installations. So up to now, the majority of the installations, yes, they are still being used because both public entities and private enterprises, they have taken up to preserve them and to use them. But there is still a number of installations that cannot be used because Greece, being in the financial crisis for many years now, does not have the funds to preserve the buildings. And it is really a pity because we do have so many young people, but also adults, that they would like to make use of those installations, being in the heart of Athens. It is really a pity to want really to go in there and get some exercise and not be able to go into the stadium because you don't know if it is safe enough, because at the last time that it was preserved, it was maybe 10 years ago. So in your business plan, definitely you have to make sure that you have the funds to preserve whatever you will create. On the other hand, however, I think that every city that is willing to host the games should build the installations by taking into account the needs of its own inhabitants. So if you really need to make new stadiums, go ahead and create them, use them for the Olympic Games, and then open them up to your people. If you don't need to create new installations, I would like to say that the Olympic Games should not be the games of a city, but of a country. There might be another stadium in another city in your own country. Please ask to use the installations that you already have in another city, or ask, design which other city, but for this hosting city, would need these installations. We have airplanes within like an hour, the athletes could move with the country, maybe less than that.
Right.
And we do have very good examples of that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe Calgary needs to team up with somebody as well.
It's very much part of the Agenda 2020
Okay.
thinking.
So 2 very quick questions. There are 4 minutes left, so please.
Wow.
David Katz from PayPal, and I appreciate the discussion on physical infrastructure. I wanted to move briefly to digital. It strikes me that at least since 2012, you had a shift. Most of modern Olympic history, you had kind of one way for the global audience viewing on TV. Since at least the London Games, it strikes me that you have a lot more social media and interaction
correct.
where many more people can really participate. How do you see kind of the rise of digital changing the way cities might organize Olympics and how the global community participates in Olympic Games?
So that'll be for Ms. Kawamura, but just a moment while we take the second question. So you have a chance to think about the answer while we take
I'm
it.
going to be brief, but I went to London 2012, and I was really impressed on how the sponsors work on the legacy, especially to replace the workforce development. Now in Rio, we have 300,000 people without jobs. So when I came back from London 2012, I went to Coke and I went to Dow actually, and we wanted to work with this. But for 3.5 years, I heard no, we cannot think of it. We are thinking on the infrastructure side. We're working on the infrastructure of Rio. So I decided to partner with a chef called Massimo Bottura, and we created this restaurant school community center in the downtown Rio.
So the question, David, we need to...
How can we partner? How can we break this?
To get the sponsors to work on the legacy.
Not only the sponsors to cooperate. If you're thinking about talking with civil society or people like us want to collaborate and create things together, how
So,
to access that?
Peter, that'll be for you, but Ms. Kawamura first.
So the digital history, digital development history is the same, exact same the development, the Olympic movement history. So as you said, London Games, it's really, they use the social medias, to use the social medias for the first time in the Olympic Games. So many followers, and also the plus hashtags there, happen in London Games. The heading to Tokyo 2020, it's going to be, the huge impacted by the digital media, the digital tools. For example, the how to watch their games. So maybe we can find their innovative and never the tools to watch the games. Especially for the Paralympic Games and also the Olympic Games, so we can try to much more the push their media development and involve the medias to the games. But I'm really concerned to the area of the culture. For example, the artists can show their performance with their social medias with hashtag. You can find a clue in the Rio Olympic Games. There is the IOC provide a culture program in Rio. That is a giant art with a hashtag. So their medias, they develop the news for their thousands and the billion people that follow it. So artists can be shown the art with social media, with hashtags through the Olympic Games. So as I mentioned about their action and positive legacy, you can collaborate in each areas with the medias.
Thank you. Peter,
Yeah,
not just about Dow, but in general, can companies do more to help with the legacy?
Of course, and yes, and that's one of our clear missions, of course, is not just there's going to be a huge economic tailwind for Tokyo based on hospitality, tourism, infrastructure. But again, your point is very clear, as I understand your question. What can you do after the Games to make sure that legacy continues? Our emphasis at this point in time has been on education, and primarily STEM education, because of being a chemistry company, we need to promote science and math. The short answer is, the way that I would suggest you do that is, rather than come directly to the sponsors, you go to the Japan Olympic Committee, you go to the Tokyo Organizing Committee, and you go to the IOC and say, I have a great idea. I would like to work with the sponsors, and then they will come to the sponsors and say, how would you like to, so the answer is, I think you'll have trouble one-on-one, but the way to do that is through the various organizing committees, and you probably I think you'd have success.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think we've almost come to the end of our session. Somebody was telling me over lunch that they expect a legacy of the Paralympics, for example, to completely change the accessibility of Tokyo. That should be a step change that will endure for years to come. So thank you all. This has been very educational for me, very uplifting. I remember I was in Singapore when Joseph Schooling won the butterfly relay this year, and it was an amazing moment. As a boy, he idolized Michael Phelps, and then for him to beat him was incredible. I think in Japan you had the 400-meter relay silver medal, which is an amazing story of a team coming together that individually they didn't have the speed, but together they did. So it's a wonderful spirit of the Olympics, as you mentioned it. So thank you all, thanks to the panel, and thank you for your time. Cheers.
Thank you.